Survival horror, even in today's time, sees a lot of new installations and is generally seen as one of the better horror experiences nowadays. These games challenge players not just with what lurked in the shadows, but also with the dread of limited resources and also unrelenting tension. Over the years, they have evolved for better or for worse depending on who you ask, weaving more complex narratives and pushing boundaries to instill new fears like never seen before. But what exactly happens when a game just doesn't challenge your survival skills, but confronts your very senses of safety, morality, and humanity? Fear and Hunger is one of those games that appeared briefly on YouTube and the internet in the early 2020s. Fear and Hunger was specifically brought to my attention at that time because it was one of those games that was banned in the country that I live in. This already made me really think about it and what it had to offer, as most of these banned games are games with themes that I absolutely love to dive into. And of course, almost 5 years later, when I played it for the first time, I absolutely fell in love with it and the thematics that it had to offer. Atmosphere has always been the soul of horror, and music is its beating heart. From the haunting piano melodies of Silent Hill to the tense orchestral swells of Resident Evil, soundtracks in horror games have a unique power to unsettle and immerse the player. From the moment Fear and Hunger begins, its oppressive atmosphere grips at you. Every pixel, every note of its haunting soundtrack. Many games use their soundtrack to give the player a perspective on what's going on around them, and Fear and Hunger is no different. So, what is the difference? The execution. Where other games use music to create tension or sorrow, Fear and Hunger uses it to amplify dread and disorientation. Each track feels less like a composition and something more of a soundscape of a land of madness and despair that makes the game's horrors all the more visceral and much more complex. And now I ask you, do you count this as music? Because for me, it definitely is, but still it feels different, dangerous, and somehow still inviting. I'll be honest, at this point, I was already hooked when playing the game for the first time. These two soundtracks immediately sold me on the theme of this game, which is absolute isolation and oppression. But more than that, there's a deeper layer underneath all of this that we will dive in much later. And as the game progresses, we hear many other incredible soundscapes that create the atmosphere of this game. And I'm sure if you played the game, you will remember at least one of those soundtracks. The first time that you meet a boss in this game and you hear this exact soundtrack. Have you ever been jump scared by a soundtrack before in your life? Because I as sure as hell have not. But this, holy shit, this made me jump. And my god, I don't think any game's soundtrack has ever scared me before like this one did, in a completely different way. This is pure horror. There is nothing melancholic, there is nothing about this. The track's name, Pulse and Anxiety, fits this as perfectly as it can be described by me. I do, however, also want to talk about something different and not just the soundtrack of this game, which is already insane and intense as it is. You see, Fear and Hunger fascinated me like little other games can anymore. Because with most games today, there isn't really a point to dive deeper into the plot, as most things can just normally be found inside of the game itself, or be explained by some normal book, maybe inside of the game's own lore. And while Fear and Hunger doesn't strive away from the occasional in-game showcase of its lore, many things just outright never get any explanation anywhere. And this mainly stems from the fact that Fear and Hunger is greatly inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and specifically Robert W. Chambers, which, if you didn't know, created a book called The King in Yellow. But what exactly is The King in Yellow even about? To keep it simple, The King in Yellow is a collection of short stories that blend supernatural horror with psychological dread. There is a sense of creeping unease throughout, an ever-present suggestion in this book that beneath the surface of reality, something vast and unknowable stirs. The lost city of Carcosa, the masked stranger in yellow, the cryptic symbols of a forgotten order. Each element lingers in the background, never fully explained, only felt by the reader. I'm sure that if you have played Fear and Hunger, you will at least see the references in this game to what I just described to you. Carcosa being a sort of reference to the lost city in Fear and Hunger, and Hastur literally being the thing Legard transforms into at the very end, accompanied by the said yellow sign. And coming back to the psychological aspect of all of this, I personally believe that a lot of factors in this game come from the general term of psychology. For the creator of Fear and Hunger, this relationship runs pretty deep, since he was also inspired not only by Lovecraft and Chambers, but also by Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. You can find many dark themes in this game that you can either link to Freud's inner struggle with the id, ego, and superego, or to Lacan's topography of the psychosocial realm. Freud's theory of the id, ego, and superego manifests in the game's mechanics and narrative. Freud believed that the mind is divided into three parts: the id, our primal instinctual self, driven by hunger, fear, and desire. See what I did there? The ego mediates these urges, balancing them with the constant restraints of reality, and the superego represents morality and societal norms, often in conflict with our base instincts. In Fear and Hunger, this dynamic is more than just theoretical, it's embedded in the gameplay itself. The resource scarcity, brutal combat, and moral dilemmas force players to act more on instincts, often overriding their sense of right and wrong. This game tries to blur the line between survival and submission, constantly reminding you that every decision in this game is a reflection of who you are or who you might become along the way. Meanwhile, Lacan's exploration of desire and the fractured nature of identity seeps into almost every corner of Fear and Hunger. Lacan expanded on Freud's ideas, focusing on identity and desire. He proposed the mirror stage, where we first recognize ourselves as separate beings, creating a fragmented sense of self that we spend our lives trying to reconcile. Fear and Hunger taps into this fragmentation and longing by presenting a world where the player's identity is constantly challenged. The choices you make, whether to ally with others, betray them, or succumb to despair, force you to confront not just the game's horrors, but the fractured self within you. Coming back to the overall game, have you ever thought about the name Fear and Hunger? It is an odd title for a game for sure, because it's very direct. It's like if I called Skyrim Dragons and Shouts. And while the title is indeed very accurate, it doesn't focus on much of the game's deeper story or gameplay. In Fear and Hunger, however, this title is almost absolutely perfect, and way more than just the name of the game. If you do start this game with zero prior knowledge, you might think that this is just the name of the game, and although that is true, it's not just that. It is also the name of the dungeon which we enter into. The literal only place we ever see in the entire game. The Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. I absolutely love this little detail because it achieves something that you only really realize when you venture further into the game itself. Fear and Hunger as a dungeon name. How hard can it be to overcome? I mean, just imagine coming across a place like Fear and Hunger or the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger in any sort of other video game like Skyrim or maybe in your D&D party. Imagine how you would react to something called the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. It doesn't sound as threatening as it really is. Like a spider's nest, this dungeon has drawn in all the thousands of souls it has claimed over the years with the allures of being an easy go-in, go-out place. Standing in front of the gates of this place really gives you the feeling that this is just an average abandoned castle. It is such a well-crafted facade that is so carefully deployed over this place that you would never even suspect what could just be below your feet. In the depths of Fear and Hunger's lore are certain creatures that humans in this world call divine. From the so-called omnipotent old gods to the corrupted new gods, this is a world where power comes at a terrible price, and transformation is as much a descent as it is an ascension. The old gods represent primordial chaos, existing beyond human comprehension, almost like forces of nature. Under them we have gore, the dread and chaos of the world. Sylvian, the god of love and fertility, who apparently created mankind together with Gorgoroth. Almer, the Ascended One, a sort of Jesus-like elusive god, similar to our own world. The ever-so-elusive god of the depths, which was buried inside the tombs of the dungeon. And of course, the newborn god of Fear and Hunger, who came only into existence because of the player's actions. In the world of Fear and Hunger, divinity is searched by many, but followed by few. Many people wish to one day become the things they worship and achieve what they call their true selves. The old gods are one of the main drives in the world of Fear and Hunger, or so it seems at least. Because in truth, these gods barely exist on the mortal plane anymore, and some of them are outright dead for who knows how long already by the time they are discovered again. On the contrary, it is more so the new gods that shape the earth much more than the old gods are. The new gods embody humanity's flaws magnified by divine might. They are driven by greed, ego and despair, and their transformations into the beings they is a reflection of this, as every new god once was a living soul that somehow achieved enlightenment. They sought to escape mortality only to become something far more horrifying in the end. And in Fear and Hunger, the line between man and God is so razor thin, and crossing it often results in the loss of humanity altogether. This is where I originally intended to end the video. However, just shortly before editing this video, I finished my first run of Fear and Hunger Termina, and by God, I would have missed out on so much if I had left it alone. Fear and Hunger Termina starts off with a very different vibe than its predecessor did, while still feeling somehow familiar. The whole starting segment with the train has a much more melancholic vibe, and it somehow gives up a feeling of longing, which is very weird because that's the one thing that I never felt in the first game. Also, something I noticed while playing through the intro multiple times is that each character's intro feels much more diverse than in the first one. While the first one also had a diverse cast, this one feels much more so. The entire setting of this place is so incredibly good, and I don't even know how to describe it. First of all, the title Fear and Hunger is merely just there so the game has a conclusion to it. But at the same time, it still fits the theme of the game. Where the original Fear and Hunger felt like a slow, inevitable descent into the bowels of an ancient dungeon, Termina presents a different kind of horror. A world that still breathes, but one that is rotting away, caught in the grip of something far greater than human comprehension. Over all of this time that has passed between the first and the second game, the old gods have not been entirely forgotten. Some still hold influence, their presence lingering like shadows from a distant past. The gods of fear and hunger and despair continue to weave their threads into the nightmare, reminding those who seek power that even if a world of new horrors, the echoes of the past still whisper strong. To these ancient whispers, we can now count a few more old gods that weren't known before. One of the most prominent newer old gods in Termina, Rare, governs the dream illusions and the cycles of reality itself. He is the main force behind the Termina festival, pulling people into his surreal nightmare realm, where time bends, reality fractures, and mortality becomes uncertain. Then we have Venushka, representing the cycles of life, death, and regrowth, a god of nature, so to speak. However, unlike Sylvian, who embodied the pleasures of excess of the flesh, Venushka is the force that ensures all things return to the earth. In Termina, he isn't found explicitly, but his influence manifests in overgrown ruins, pulsating fungal growths, and the slow reclamation of civilization by the wild. Standing out from all the others, the Sulphur God is one of the most enigmatic and terrifying figures in Termina. Unlike the other old gods who embody grand cosmic forces or natural cycles, the Sulphur God represents destruction through suffering, burning away everything in a relentless, agonizing purge. The Sulphur God is such a prominent figure in Termina that he himself deserves his own video almost, because there are so many mysteries surrounding him. We never get a full explanation of what he even is or what he exactly does. Some theories even state that the Sulphur God is just another version of all Myr. However, for now, we do not truly know the answer to this question. And then, there's logic. Logic, the machine god, is the primary antagonist of ending A in Termina. Logic is one of the many things that link Termina to its predecessor title, because it was actually created by the Yellow King, the god. Or Kaiser, how he calls himself now. However, still, Logic is a very different boss than what you'd expect a game like Fear and Hunger to have. Logic's ending A represents the modern day of man, where we are all connected by technology, so meaning the internet itself in a way. Having a boss that's just designed around being an aspect of the internet is an incredibly good idea that I have never seen any game ever pull off like this. And this being ending A of the entire game means that this is most likely the game's manual ending that most players will stumble upon first time playing, which is also why I personally think that this is most likely the canon ending to this game. Because I think just like in Fear and Hunger 1, where we ascended the god of Fear and Hunger, maybe in Termina we are ascending Logic to a place like we did in the first game. I haven't really been talking about the Moonscorching yet, have I? So I haven't really talked about this yet, but Fear and Hunger Termina is on a time limit. 3 in-game days to be exact. So what exactly happens after those 3 days if you haven't beaten any ending of the game yet? To put it simply, your character will Moonscorch. But mayhaps you don't really know what that means. So let me give you a brief explanation of this. The act of Moonscorching in Fear and Hunger Termina is something close resembling a transformation. Each playable character in the game has their own Moonscorched form. So what exactly do the characters transform into, and why is everybody so different? I'm gonna keep this explanation very brief because this is a very deep subject matter and something that I can't fully explain in this video. First of all, we should probably analyze where Moonscorching is actually coming from. Like the name implies, Moonscorching is forced upon us by Rare. In Rare's eyes, Moonscorching should be seen as something close to an ultimate punishment for failing his game. As stated in the lore, Rare pretty much despises humankind and sees them as a pest that is trying to achieve godhood. So Moonscorching is probably Rare's deep interpretation of humans trying to become new gods. Of course, this is just my interpretation of how I see it, so take this as you will. But I still haven't really talked about why everybody looks so different. Like I said before, Moonscorching is how Rare sees that specifically designed human. However, it is also how these humans see themselves. You see, Moonscorching is an act of transformation into what can only be called your worst actual you. Moonscorching brings out everything that you try to hide from the overworld and displays them in a grotesque style. That is why every character's Moonscorching is so erratically different from others. Because of course everyone has their own insecurities, their own fears. Let's actually look at some of the Moonscorch transformations and try to figure out what that character's inner fears actually are. Abella's Moonscorched form is actually very simple to explain, and still it holds a lot of meaning probably for a lot of people. You see, Abella is a female mechanic in the game. Her primary fears are that because of her job being mainly man-influenced, that she herself isn't seen as a true mechanic because of her gender. You can of course also twist this in a way that she is afraid of being seen as too manly. Then we have one of my favorite Moonscorched forms in the game, that being of Karen the reporter. Like I already said, Karen is a reporter that mainly reports on already past battlefields. In the game, she acts very cruel and very cold towards other people. However, that is all a mask, for her own personal fear is herself. Karen sees herself as a vulture, picking up the last bits of remains left on the battlefields. That is why you can see her as almost like a harpy, with the skulls on the back representing her own struggles, that she herself is carrying the burden of all the dead she has ever reported on, only for herself to profit off those dead people in the end. Then we have Olivia's Moonscorched form. And while this one is a little bit harder to interpret, we can still take several things away from this Moonscorched form. First of all, Olivia is the only character in the game that is reliant on a wheelchair. She is also an acclaimed botanist, but for all of her life she always stood in the shadow of her sister, who was always just one step better. My personal theory on all of this is that Olivia herself doesn't even see herself as a human being anymore, and more like a statue or a construct that is just waiting for other people to help her. Because as you can see, she doesn't even have arms anymore. She doesn't have legs. She's just standing there, like she is in her wheelchair in her actual body. Obviously there are many more Moonscorch forms that we could be analyzing now, but I don't just wanna bloat this video with information on all the Moonscorched forms. If you are, however, interested in this topic, then there's an extremely well-made video by a channel named Lucky. I will link that video down below, so make sure to check it out if you do wanna know more about this, because it is very interesting indeed. Fear and Hunger is definitely not what I expected when I first dived into the game. There aren't many games out there that have such a deep relating narrative, with so many deep and dark themes around it. I highly encourage you to check this game out for yourself if you were even slightly interested in at least one of the things that I was talking about in this video. I hope that you did enjoy this video, and if you have any more games that I should be covering like this, please let me know down in the comments. Thank you all again so much for watching. I know I was gone for a pretty long time already, but I also only want to upload quality videos for you. With that being said, I'll see you all in the next one, and good night.